The nWo transformed wrestling in ways fans have never seen before, but like many things in the 90s, nWo burned brightly and got too close to the sun, resulting in its spectacular downfall, and there's three major points to cover that many fans believe made this occur. But why does this rebellious faction still matter today? Join us as we dive into how the New World Order not only revolutionized the industry, but left a legacy that's unforgettable. And they managed to do it with a simple premise of blurring the lines between reality and fiction, which has become a staple in wrestling storytelling. Factions like the Shield, Bullet Club, and even the Bloodline owe something to the nWo. So let's explore everything from top to bottom by setting the stage from the start.
Here's the nWo! Ready or not, here we come!
In the mid-1990s, the world was shifting. Grunge music, led by bands like Nirvana, had killed off the glam of the 80s, and movies like Pulp Fiction were redefining what was cool with their anti-heroes and edgy narrative. To say the least, the squeaky clean image was in the past, and embracing rebellion was working. So in the world of wrestling, WWF was still pushing its family-friendly style with wrestlers like Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, but by the 90s, there was a growing desire for something more real. Enter WCW, which was seen as a second-tier wrestling promotion for years. However, under the leadership of Eric Bischoff, WCW was gaining momentum, and Bischoff knew that in order to compete with WWF, WCW needed something fresh, something that spoke to the changing culture of the 1990s. He wanted to give the fans something grittier and unpredictable. Cue the arrival of Scott Hall and Kevin Nash in WCW in 1996.
And we are sick of it.
What do you mean, who's we?
You know who. Ed, this is where the big boys play? What a joke.
On May 27, 1996, Scott Hall marched down through the crowd on WCW Nitro and grabbed the mic and uttered a promo that till this day, fans couldn't believe.
You know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here.
And as for the crowd's reaction, he looked like he just walked off the street. Something like this just hadn't been seen before. It was real, or at least it felt real, and the fans, they ate it up. Kevin Nash would shortly join Hall 2 weeks later, and the two outsiders began wreaking havoc on WCW programming. What set them apart from the usual bad guy wrestling faction was that it just didn't feel like it was part of the show. Their arrival was shocking, the guerrilla style and unpredictability echoing that anti-authority sentiment of the 1990s. So to the fans, they weren't just watching a wrestling angle, they were witnessing a rebellion against the very structure of WCW. But then came the moment that flipped the wrestling world upside down. At Bash at the Beach in 1996, during a tag match between Hall and Nash against WCW stars Sting, Luger, and Savage, the wrestling world waited for the mysterious third man to reveal himself. The anticipation was high within the arena, and out walked Hulk Hogan, WCW's squeaky clean all-American hero. Everyone thought he was coming to save WCW. Instead, Hogan shocked the world by delivering his trademark leg drop on Randy Savage, and that was it. Hogan had turned heel for the first time in his career, and with Hall and Nash by his side, the New World Order was born. And to say that the audience was outraged would be an understatement. Drinks, food, and garbage were thrown into the ring, but the three men just didn't care. They stood strong as Hogan delivered his first promo as the leader of this faction to a packed house.
With Hulk Hogan and the New World Organization of Wrestling, brother. Me and the new blood by my side. What you gonna do when the New World Organization runs wild on you?
This heel turn of Hulk Hogan, one of the most beloved babyfaces of all time, was the perfect embodiment of the 1990s rejecting the old school heroes. As for Hogan, him ditching his red and yellow, say your prayers and eat your vitamins image for the black and white Hollywood villain persona, he became the ultimate anti-hero for wrestling fans. But what came after, nobody could have predicted.
And look at this.
They're going to spray paint.
I cannot believe this. This is unbelievable.
Somebody needs
This is
to go
turning
in
my
there and
stomach
call.
right now.
They are spray painted
Tony,
the nWo logo.
The New World Order took over wrestling, not just in the ring, but in the streets. Suddenly, the black and white nWo shirt was everywhere, and if you were a wrestling fan in the late 90s, you either wore the nWo shirt or you knew someone who did. It was like wearing the logo of your favorite band. It was essentially a badge of coolness, and for WCW, this translated into huge ratings. And their us versus them mentality fit perfectly with what audiences were looking for, and within the ring, the nWo just didn't beat the WCW wrestlers. They humiliated them by spray painting the nWo NWO onto their bodies and trashing the set. They just didn't want to be the top faction in WCW, they wanted to run the whole damn show. And the crazy reality is, they nearly did. WCW Nitro started dominating in the ratings over WWF Monday Night Raw, and this was unheard of at the time. For 83 weeks straight, WCW Nitro was the most watched wrestling show on television. The New World Order made WCW the hottest thing in wrestling, and that rebel energy, it was contagious. It felt like you was part of something that was real, something that was changing the game. And because of it, the NWO became the centerpiece of WCW programming. Every week, fans tuned in to see who would join the NWO, who would be their next target, and how WCW loyal stars would fight back. And because of their overwhelming popularity, the NWO merchandising sales were so strong that they rivaled and at the time even surpassed WWF's top selling stars like Stone Cold Steve Austin. So it was clear that WCW had landed on a gold mine, but it just wasn't the wrestling fans who were hooked, as the New World Order's cool factor began to attract celebrities. Most notably was the NBA star Dennis Rodman, who was already known for his controversial antics. Rodman would join the NWO in 1997, and with his involvement brought mainstream attention to WCW. Suddenly, wrestling wasn't a niche form of entertainment, it was mainstream pop culture. Eventually, even Karl Malone, another NBA star, and even TV host Jay Leno got pulled into the wrestling world, just showing how much the NWO had penetrated modern television. But while their run was immensely popular and successful, it would be wrong to say that it was perfect. As cracks started to show by the end of the year. Like all good things, the momentum couldn't last forever, and by 1997, the faction that had once felt exclusive started to lose its edge. Wrestlers who didn't fit the mold like Vincent and Buff Bagwell were unexpectedly joining the NWO, diluting its appeal. It stopped being cool, and instead, it felt like anyone could join the group. But despite this, the NWO continued their dominance on TV, and this would trigger one of the best character changes within WCW. In early 1986, Sting's appearance started to change. He grew longer, darker hair, replacing his blonde flat top haircut he was known for, but more importantly, he adapted this new persona of an Avenger, very similar to the Crow character from the 1994 movie. But what ensued was even better, a 1.5 year long storyline build-up with a simple premise. Sting was WCW's last hope to topple the regime of Hollywood Hulk Hogan and the NWO. He would constantly foil their plans without saying a word, and the audience and fans around the world were hooked. So it was a no-brainer to have Hogan vs Sting in the main event at Starrcade 1997. Unfortunately, what was meant to be a clash of titans kind of became a hot mess because of the politics and veto power certain wrestlers had, as WCW produced one of the worst main event payoffs in wrestling history, as Sting, the lone wolf, the anti-authority hero, the savior of WCW, was booked to win the big gold, but not in the fashion that the fans wanted, as the screwy finish with the slow count and Bret Hart coming out to restart the match just tarnished the 18 months worth of storytelling that had been built up. So at this point, this is the first nail in the coffin. It was obvious that the NWO began to dominate too much. Week after week, they ran over the WCW loyalists, constantly winning and rarely facing any consequences. Essentially, the bad guys were too good, leaving WCW fan favorites like Sting and Diamond Dallas Page struggling to get a fair shot. Because of it, fans started to turn on the storyline, not because they didn't care, it's because the NWO had overstayed its welcome. And if being compared to modern WWE programming, this felt more like the Authority storyline in 2014, where Team Cena went against Team Authority at Survivor Series, and despite winning thanks to Dolph Ziggler, nothing changed in terms of programming. So while WCW and NWO could have learned from their mistakes, it seems as though they were too blindsided by their previous success, as the downward spiral would continue throughout the year. So, by 1998, the faction started to lose its edge. To make matters worse, WCW split the group into two factions, nWo Hollywood, led by Hulk Hogan, and nWo Wolfpac, led by Kevin Nash. And while the nWo Wolfpac became fan favorites, the split only added to the confusion, with even Sting, the one true WCW loyalist, joining the black and red of the Wolfpac. To be honest, at this point, the nWo brand was no longer about a hostile takeover. It was just another bloated faction, and the fans knew it and began to lose interest. But WWE did have one final ace up their sleeves, and that was the emergence of Bill Goldberg, who was a WCW original that managed to build up a main event status. With his impressive 173 undefeated win streak, he was no joke and a big deal within WCW. However, he too fell into the NWO's influence of backstage politics. And despite Goldberg defeating Hulk Hogan in the Georgia Dome for the World Heavyweight Championship, he was never given the main event match at most pay-per-views. He would often go on second to last, playoffs with Hogan main eventing against opponents like the Ultimate Warrior. And it just goes to show how much influence Hulk Hogan had when it came to creative. But what ensued for Goldberg was that he had a lengthy run with the title but was ultimately booked to lose to Kevin Nash at Starrcade 1998 thanks to Scott Hall interfering, which not only ended his undefeated streak, it ended his title reign and it ended the hopes that most fans were holding on to, as this was the second nail in the coffin for many. And to this day, fans still have their reservations about how this match was booked. Many believe that there was some game being played or somebody was using a certain amount of leverage they had within the company to get this decision made. Here's what Goldberg and Nash themselves had to say about this whole situation.
At that point in my career, I'm a worker. I don't give opinions as far as direction of storylines. That's not my job. That's not what I get paid to do. I show up and I do what they tell me to do.
People wanted to see Goldberg get beat. It was time for him to get beat. You know, Goldberg in his book says that I booked the match to beat him, and I point out two facts: that I have the pay stub when I started booking, because I had a completely different booking contract, which was mid-February. He got beat December 27th. And the second thing is, I was a babyface.
So despite this group still being popular, the nWo was no longer the must-see attraction it once was. WCW's inability to move beyond the storyline started to hurt the product. New stars weren't being created because the nWo wrestlers were always on top of the card and things began to get stagnant. This is considering that they had Chris Jericho, Chris Benoit, Billy Kidman and even Eddie Guerrero. It's a shame what could have been had they just stepped out of their comfort zone. So whilst WCW started to lose its footing, across the pond to them, WWF was starting to learn and adapt to its rivals. This directly led to the most popular time in wrestling history, now known as the Attitude Era. It's no secret that the nWo directly influenced WWF's Attitude Era, which kicked off no longer after their rise. WCW forced WWF to adapt, ditching their cartoonish gimmick in favor of more mature content. Led by stars like Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, and D-Generation X, WWF embraced the edgy, rebellious spirit that WCW had capitalized on with the nWo. But instead of relying on a single faction, WWF made the entire product more adult-oriented. And taking center stage was Stone Cold, as he became the ultimate anti-hero, flipping off the boss Vince McMahon and becoming a megastar at the same time, as fans loved his rough attitude. At the same time, The Rock also became a breakout star with his iconic promos and charisma, and they also had a number of other top superstars that were able to take center stage like Mankind and The Undertaker. And by 1999, WWF had regained its lead in the rating wars. Monday Night Raw was more unpredictable and entertaining, as WCW Nitro was stuck in a never-ending nWo storyline. So as for WCW and the New World Order, what came next is when most fans finally just gave up. One of the most infamous moments in wrestling history came on January 4th, 1999, when Hulk Hogan faced Kevin Nash for the WCW World Championship. Fans had been waiting for this clash of the nWo giants, expecting an epic match. Instead, what we got was the infamous finger poke of doom. As the bell rang, Hogan poked Nash lightly on the chest, and Nash dramatically fell on the mat. Hulk Hogan then pinned Nash, winning the WCW Championship in a terrible display that shocked and angered the fans around the world. What should have been a monumental match between the two nWo giants turned into a lazy, cynical joke. Even Eric Bischoff had this to say regarding the matter, quoting that things were even worse behind the scenes as egos were clashing.
From an audience's perspective, it's easy to, kind of go, hey, well, they did that finger poke thing and then things really started getting bad after that. Therefore, that had to be the reason. Now, had we done that same thing a year earlier, wouldn't have mattered. It would have worked better. But there were so many other things that were really going on behind the scenes, and some of it ended up on camera as a result. No, the finger poke of doom was coincidental to the decline. It wasn't the cause of it.
Essentially, the finger point of doom became the symbol of everything that had gone wrong for the fans. The faction had devolved into a mockery of itself, prioritizing backstage politics and cheap storytelling over what the fans wanted to see. And then the downward spiral just continued from there, as the nWo had once represented an unstoppable force, but now had no real identity. By 2000, WCW was in freefall, ratings were plummeting, fans were turning out, and the company was bleeding money. The New World Order, once was WCW's hottest commodity, was no longer relevant. WCW attempted to revive the NWO multiple times, bringing the group back in various forms, NWO 2000, NWO Elite, and others, but the magic was gone. Meanwhile, WWF had fully embraced the future, with younger stars like Triple H, Kurt Angle, and Chris Jericho carrying the torch. And by 2001, WCW was out of options. AOL Time Warner, WCW's parent company, decided to sell the struggling promotion. And finally, in March 2001, Vince McMahon bought WCW and the entire video library for a fraction of its former worth. For Vince McMahon and WWF, he managed to take down his biggest rival and the juggernaut that was the New World Order. When it comes to what went wrong with the stable, a lot has to do with the creative decisions and the issues that were going on backstage. One of the key issues with the NWO was the sheer number of wrestlers in the faction. What had started as an elite, tight-knit group had ballooned to including nearly half the WCW roster. Wrestlers like Buff Bagwell, Horace Hogan, Disco Inferno, and even Dusty Rhodes joined the NWO, further diluting its original mystique, which only compounded their problems even more. Rising talents like Chris Jericho, Eddie Guerrero, and Rey Mysterio were constantly overshadowed by the aging NWO members, preventing the company from refreshing its product. On top of all of this, there came a point in time where Hogan and Nash didn't get along due to the differences they had when it came to their versions of their stable. And Nash himself revealed it on the Click This podcast that there was an apparent friction between himself and Hulk Hogan while in WCW.
Were you kind of a middleman between you and or Scott, between Hogan and the office?
No, because by the time it didn't work for Hulk, there was already friction between us. Like that was some of the problem was, because Hulk was always so used to, and I'll just use his direct quote. His entire career, people like stood underneath the Hogan apple tree and waited for a golden apple to fall, and they'd get a 6-month run with Hulk, and they'd have the run of their life. And he said, and you two pricks come in with chainsaws and try to cut the fucking tree down. I can't say he wasn't wrong in feeling that way, but it's just like we had a vision, and we were 10 years younger than he was.
Yeah.
But beyond that, there was the issue that WCW benefited immensely from the Sting storyline. And while top WCW faces like Diamond Dallas Page and Lex Luger had strong feuds with the NWO, Sting was always the group's main rival. Simply put, WCW couldn't find any story to follow that, as Goldberg versus the NWO story in 1999 was a disaster. Then there's the issue of Scott Hall, as WCW grew frustrated with Hall for missing shows and no longer being vested due to his alcohol problem. And crazy enough, Hall ended up playing a drunk character on television for months in 1998, stumbling into the ring and being mocked for his real life addiction. So it's easy to see how quickly things were going bad, but regardless of everything, there was a lot of good that came out of the NWO's dominance. And that's the fact that WWF had to change in order to compete, as the company turned things around after the infamous Montreal Screwjob, and Vince was hell-bent on winning the Monday Night Wars. Not only that, the NWO's influence extends beyond WCW too. The idea of factions, particularly cool heel factions, became a major part of wrestling storytelling. And groups like D-Generation X and the Bloodline wouldn't exist without the New World Order. Yet, even in its fall, the NWO remains a crucial chapter in wrestling history. The group revolutionized the way wrestling was presented, and its legacy can still be felt today. So whilst NWO may have fallen, the impact that it made will live forever, for life. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. What do you think was the downfall of the NWO? And if you liked the video, make sure to subscribe and give it a thumbs up for more wrestling content.